Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Я рад приветствовать вас здесь, в каминном зале, на площадке
Colleagues, I welcome you
И сегодняшнюю дискуссию,
here at the R-Pharm, and today
причем не только в России,
we will focus on an extremely relevant issue. We'll talk about the new structure of the economy.
это такой очень широкий,
The
большой.
economy is a broad concept,
Сегодняшний наш гость,
and
спикер,
today our key speaker, the Minister of Industry and Trade, Denis Manturov, is with us.
не просто участвовал вот в этом переформатировании.
He's been part of the upgrade of Russia's economy and industry specifically.
Так получилось, что все те вызовы, которые с нами стряслись,
We've been facing the challenges of 2020, and thanks to him, we came up with a certain response.
фокусировать именно на промышленном аспекте.
And I would like to focus this conversation on
Сегодняшнего дискурса.
industry.
Еще раз. Какую реальность новую для нас создала?
So what's the new reality like, driven by the pandemic?
Насколько
What are the changes?
востребованы все те усилия, которые
There have been a lot of efforts that
в рамках
the ministry
многим казалось, что это, в общем-то, наверное, не очень нужно.
undertook.
Усилиями
Some believe
в других странах.
it's not really relevant and we can outsource it to our neighbors.
Того
But when the pandemic arrived,
нашего сегодняшнего гостя,
Russia was rescued by your
вот
achievements, by your efforts.
весь этот год.
Otherwise, we would not be able to do a lot of things because of the broken supply chains. So what are the key takeaways? What are the key lessons from this pandemic?
И реализация новых,
And how have your efforts helped
которых
to handle the situation
прошло в более сжатые сроки.
and do it in a very fast
сказать то, что
way?
если бы не было
Well, I'm tempted to say,
его придумать или что-то
had it not been for COVID-19,
обеспечить такую
it should have been invented, as some wise man said once.
в целом
So we needed that kind of
сегмент
challenge in the economy, I mean,
работающей промышленности.
in manufacturing in particular, and trade. This is something I'm in charge. So we had to come up with something
Дополнительный импульс
to jolt out of that comfort zone, to mobilize all intellectual production, technology resources,
и испытать,
and to test ourselves, to put ourselves to the test,
где у нас
to
есть
figure out
слабые,
where our weaknesses are
но где мы
and where
как раз себя с точки
we
зрения
could
тех компетенций, которые
really
наработаны.
come out on top and
Вот пример.
where we could rise to the challenge. I'll give an example. Pharmaceuticals.
Коллеги, журналисты не так давно
Some of the media professionals
о том,
have asked me,
там фармацевтика себя сегодня чувствует, и как она
what is pharmaceuticals like today?
помогает справляться
Has pharma survived and how does it help in fighting COVID-19? And I was straightforward,
что
and
происходит.
you're a witness to what was happening in the pharmaceuticals for the past decade.
Когда мы только формировали стратегию,
I remember when we were just drafting the 2020 blueprint,
с дистрибуцией,
you were still doing distribution, you were building the first factory, and you were there
не только
opening this
не думать о производстве.
factory.
Так вот, если мы
And it was great because you thought about production. So if the pandemic took place 10 years before,
тяжело
then
без помощи
it would be really difficult
рубежа
to survive without assistance from abroad,
пережили
to survive the 2020 challenges.
и проверка на прочность
This is our test, this is our endurance test
промышленности, которые
for the
сами за себя
industries
тоже
that Russia currently has in place. And that applies to other areas too, like medical equipment,
и
medical supplies,
предприятия, которые были
medical devices,
там, средствами индивидуальной защиты.
and PPEs, production, and trade too.
Как говорится, первый удар,
Trade was hit
значит, в марте месяце, когда мы столкнулись с
and was hit for the first time in March
ажиотажным
when
продуктом,
we saw
продукты питания. Там первый
huge demand for staples, for basic necessities. People rushed to the stores to stock up,
лишний раз
and
подтверждает, что
that once again reaffirms
политика
that our
в области торговли, она
policy in trade and manufacturing has helped to provide that cushion, that buffer that survived that acid test.
Условно, сейчас на секундочку забудем про промышленность, хотя
Okay, let's put manufacturing aside
переформатирование
for
торговли,
a minute.
моделей
Well, a reformatting
классической розницы
of trade, moving away from classic retail to e-commerce,
оказалось условно таким легко воплотимым
was
в
it
условиях нашей
really, was it easy, given our logistics challenges, given our
что в рамках
vast
коронавируса,
expanses here in Russia?
связанные там, ну, скажем, бесконтактным
Was it really easy to do?
действием, они стали там новой нормальностью.
Contactless
Озон, Wild,
payments and delivery became the new norm. Ozon, Wildberries
доминантами на
were never dominant players
внезапно стали
before COVID-19, and suddenly they are the backbone of our economic growth. They are the key drivers of our economic growth.
пройти вот этот
Do you think we've been able to
перехода, трансформации
close that gap?
будет развиваться в дальнейшем?
Do you think there is still room for further transformation, or will we ever go back to a classic retail brick-and-mortar
думаю, что
style?
назад уже невозможно.
I don't think we can ever go back to what we have. Our consumers have tried this new method.
Что предоставляемые услуги
They really
с точки зрения
appreciate the new delivery systems.
того привыкли,
And now they've got accustomed to it.
от этого невозможно
They are getting accustomed to it. And you can't go back to what we had before.
Вы назвали там две компании.
It's really convenient. You've named two companies.
Сказать много,
Больше.
Well, there are
больше, чем
not many, I would say, but there are more than two,
другие просто
other than Ozon and Wildberries. Others are smaller in size,
определенные испытания.
and they've gone through some challenges too.
Вслух
I don't want to
эти бренды
name these brands, but
кому-то было
it's safe to say that some of them were really struggling. It was really hard for them to
там,
rise up to the challenge
вот,
posed by
к исполнителям этих услуг.
COVID-19.
Не наладил
Some of these companies didn't have the proper logistics in place. There were some delivery delays,
до недель
delays up to weeks.
компании
Well, these are major firms,
дополнительные
and major firms indeed got some extra experience.
объемы обороты выросли там в сотни раз.
Their turnover is up hundreds of times,
Определенным образом
and this trend will definitely persist.
она не будет расти так интенсивно,
Definitely, it wouldn't grow with the same pace as it was in 2020.
каждый
But
год.
even before that,
Последний
we registered
рост там, 25
growth of 25 to 30% a year in e-commerce.
проценты
Even before the pandemic.
порядка они точно будут сохраняться.
So I'm sure they will continue to remain the double-digit domain, but as the companies secure their share in the mass market, and it's not just about providing goods to our consumers domestically.
Коммерческие площадки
These commercial platforms
поставщиками
could
на
gain a foothold internationally.
уже России
They could supply Russian products abroad. We view them as exporters.
внутри страны. Поэтому для нас это важный перспективный.
So it is a very promising tool, and we'll continue to nurture this area and these companies. Okay, as a follow-up, in 2018, 2019, we said that Russian companies need to grow their output and become more competitive, but the domestic market has saturated, as we said, and we need to move into foreign markets. This is important to validate the competitiveness of our products, and because this market was saturated. And then COVID-19 came, and we found out there is room to grow, and that
оказался, что называется, на втором плане.
exports moved to the back burner because
По сути,
amid
осады экономической,
this
которая
economic siege
вокруг России, а вокруг
that emerged around every country, not just Russia, because everything
почки развалились,
became fragmented and all the supply chains were disrupted. And we started thinking of how we can supply our population with a basic necessity and other products. So we needed to cater to domestic demand.
возврат опять
So,
к модели фокуса
Do you
на-
still believe there will be a further focus on exports?
с точки зрения вот этого
Will the
соотношения?
companies reorient to exports? What do you think about the balance of exports and domestic demand in 2021? Do you think we'll go back to the model of expansion to broader markets, outside markets?
От него, от этого направления
Alexey,
отходили.
well, we still believe
Исключение.
that this dimension is extremely important, and 2020
Рост не средний.
was a year when we continued to ramp up our non-energy exports,
Предварительные.
where we continued to deliver on our commitments to increase that part of the exports. Now, if you take a look at the non-energy, non-hydrocarbon
Не
exports,
существенно, скажем так,
that share,
лучше, чем мы изначально
their
предполагали.
share is significantly better than we originally anticipated.
В зависимости от волатильности
It also depends on the volatility of prices for commodities.
за которые там отвечаем мы. Но если брать в физическом весе,
If you take
в физическом объеме,
the amount,
у нас
physical amount, then we actually are in the positive territory. So
определенное объяснение.
there is some positive growth, but there is some explanation for it,
Золото.
like supplies of gold in 2020.
Да.
Definitely, they had a major impact.
Так сложилось.
Well, that's the way it is.
То есть если
That's the kind of structure of exports we have. If we put gold aside, then the decline is not that
произошло, а если
considerable.
эту категорию
Now, if
товаров,
you take gold into account, and we cannot
металл,
but take it into account because this is metals, precious metals, but still,
неплохой плюс. Там
we actually were positive, like we were up
понятно, что это будет там где-то
5 to 6%.
когда все
So we'll have all the statistics collected by mid-February. We'll come out with exact figures. But at a certain point, as you
мы направили
correctly said, we
невозможно
put all of our effort to
задачи внутри страны,
satisfy domestic demand.
той номенклатуре, которая всегда была
But
востребована,
there have been items that we've always exported,
не было никаких
and we never stopped exports, and
одобрений, например,
like fertilizers
хирургической продукции.
or metals,
У нас,
metal products.
да, в какой-то момент там стройка
At a certain point in time, construction materials were slightly down, metals were slightly down, but
сделана специально
it wasn't done on purpose.
для задач внутреннего рынка.
No, it wasn't done on purpose to satisfy domestic demand. It was just
Мы
a reality. It was because of
подталкивали наши компании.
market forces, and we just then pushed our companies to supply their products to the foreign markets. Take fertilizers, for example. We ramp up
Внутренний рынок,
export. We ramp up supplies to domestic markets because agriculture is on the rise. Consumption domestically is growing, and exports are on the rise too. Or take medical devices. We haven't exported medical devices for 3 months because we had to mobilize our resources here in Russia. But since August and September, we relaunched exports, and surprisingly, face masks or suits or respirators, we've actually never exported before, right? And today we exported to other countries, including Western countries. We win bids and we beat our competitors. We supply it even to China. Or, yes, it's all about the price and value. And again, we beat Chinese competitors. It takes 2 hours to deliver products from Moscow.
Thanks for your kind words on our pharma industry and healthcare industry. But can you name 2 or 3 industry segments which really surprised you, where you never expected it could be that good? Additionally, okay, I would like to repeat the words of the president, Mr. Putin, when he spoke at a press conference. He was asked regarding the industries that showed the positive dynamics, and it was a very positive and pleasant surprise to a certain extent. For instance, like civil shipbuilding, 30% of volume growth in 2020. So it's not just something good, but this is an excellent result. Then machine building, engineering, this segment never showed two-digit growth yearly. So this was a really good indicator. But honestly, if we would talk about the car industry, you may remember the pessimistic forecasts by experts, and also we were upset back in March when we had a big decline in the markets, especially in foreign countries in the car industry. But the results of 2020, so they were negative, about 10% overall. But that's not as bad as it could have been, given what was going on in Europe, with 25 to 50% down. And as for the production, so we anticipated 20%, which was calculated as something satisfactory when we discussed government measures on encouraging the market. So it was seen as something satisfactory. But now we see that the final result is likely to be 11% of a drop. So at the moment, those are industry insights, but that's due to some work by the government, the business, who shaped, who developed the requests, and our ministry represented the government working on this agenda. So our today's topic is new economy and new type of economy. So aside from this COVID-related demand in pharma and healthcare industry, the positive dynamics in traditional industries like shipbuilding shows that we know how to work, and you know how to work. And those who work in the industries you are responsible for, well, they understand how to work. But about some new developments, what new factors appeared which never existed before, like in 2019, and what can appear on the horizon in 2021? And secondly, so you are very clear about successes in 2021, but what are your hopes for the new year, 2021? Yeah, we need to continue our progress, and the import substitution program, which proved to be efficient in solving the problems with the ready product samples and prototypes and industrial materials. So actually, our plans developed back in 2014 for 5 years, so they were implemented according to the timeline set. And this established a stable basis for our future progress with expanding our plans. At the moment, we try to build forecasts and prospects for 2024, mainly focused on localization of components. If we would take an industry, the car industry or transport machine building or aviation, engineering or the healthcare industry, in the situation where we have medications or vaccines being produced, there is a need for certain components, equipment, media, or raw materials, which are at the moment manufactured abroad. So this is a question of national security. Also, it's economically feasible when you have a certain volume. And as you correctly said earlier today, that a company, when it enters the foreign international markets, it should first get a good reference list at home. So when we discuss import substitution, its new iteration, the new plans, which we start to implement now. So, and maybe I will repeat what I already said. We shouldn't be only focused on import substitution and localization, but we should develop our own competencies, shape them. We need to have our own independent domestic technologies. We need to create the natural resource base, have our own raw materials, and that would allow us to reach the certain volumes of manufactured products. So this is a really meticulous work when you combine the results coming from different industries for certain components or devices. If we talk about batteries, we all understand that this is one of the most promising areas and industries. And today's demand and trend in industrialized and developing countries prove it. The demand for storage accumulators and equipment using electricity. So this is one of the promising trends. But what do we need for this? We need our own technological base and our own natural resources like copper. And this year, in the city of Kishtim, we plan to launch the production of ultra-thin copper foil. Without it, it would not be possible to produce accumulators. Well, besides, you would need entrepreneurs, number one, and number two, investments to support those innovative, promising technologies. So at the moment,
Вас спросить о следующем.
Mr. Kirill Dmitriev, the CEO of the Russian
2020 года
Direct Investment Fund, will join us online. And a question to you, Kirill. How do you evaluate the results of 2020, and what do you anticipate for 2021? Thank you. So, as Mr. Manturov correctly said, Russian economy could cope much better with coronavirus challenges compared to other countries. If we would take the annual GDP, we will see that the results of Russian economy exceed results in other economies by 2 times on average. And you know that we are quite good in coping with the consequences of COVID-19, and we invested in testing medicines, and our vaccines are among the best in the world. And also we saw a growth in many promising sectors. So we are investing in Doctis, which is one of the main services in online medicines, but also RH.RU, an important resource for online education, and also we invest in Kiwi with home deliveries, and also in alimentary company, which are in express delivery of food and food equipment. So we see a growth in Russian economy, and we have some strong Russian businessmen in IT technologies which proactively develop online segments. And we see that there is a strong focus on development of AI and applications that use artificial intelligence. We believe that those applications are really promising, and they can improve efficiency in a number of industries, like energy sector, by 25 to 30%. Enterprises where big data analysis can produce better results. So we believe that Russia is doing good in tackling the new challenges that emerged, and the new sectors, I mean online sectors, they will see proactive development. And as you, Mr. Manturov, correctly said, the biosecurity is an important area, and Russia is developing this sector quite well, and it will enjoy demand in future. And artificial intelligence and projects focused on genetics are really among the breakthrough technologies which will be the cornerstone of many startups in Russia's future economy. Mr. Dmitriev. So you managed to fine-tune the work of Russia's direct investment funds and created a brilliant reputation for the fund in many industries, in industries which didn't enjoy much demand before the pandemic. But how you see the future of your fund after COVID-19, how you see its existence in the framework of the reform, the optimization as announced by the chairman of the government, we are all getting prepared for? Well, honestly, I believe that it's important that the Russian Direct Investment Fund could focus on the key goal, which is struggle on COVID-19, and we could show we could focus on this segment very quickly. We still have 80 more companies in our portfolio which continue to develop proactively. So we keep investing in the infrastructure, in logistics, and our partners keep investing in many Russian companies. So, accordingly, as for the reform of the development institution, so we will manage the Russian venture company, and we have a number of new initiatives having to do with co-investment by our foreign partners and also the Russian financial groups, so high-tech projects. And in the nearest future, we will announce a mutual fund with the Russian Fund of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs and other initiatives aimed at raising more capital in the high-tech sector of Russia. Well, of course, this is something we all need, so I would like to wish you well in implementing this ambitious and very relevant goal. A question to you, Mr. Manturov. The Ministry of Industry and Commerce is a special ministry. However, you need to look at your neighbors as well. In business, there used to exist an opinion that the bureaucratic system is rigid, slow, and you need time for a solution to get mature. So, and as your predecessor, Mr. Khristenko, said, so, well, you need time for a racing horse to convert itself in a camel. So the Ministry of Trade and Commerce knew how to respond quickly to a situation. So, but in 2020, so we were in the circumstances when the government couldn't continue working the way it used to. So you need to do the same thing, but very fast and differently. So do you manage to cope with the stress? And what about your employees? For how long do you think you and they will last? Well, so you remembered Mr. Viktor Khristenko. I really respect, and he was my boss before I became the minister. And as you said about the bureaucracy, so it's like counterbalance against things the ministry failed to do in the past. And in this regard, I can tell you that I learned some very good lessons and got some very good reference on how to respond quickly in emergencies. So my first experience was back in 2008 during the recession. I was a vice minister reporting to Minister Khristenko, and we offered support to industries which were in trouble back then. And the farmer industry started to shape under Mr. Khristenko, and we were involved together in this job. As for our current team, so the backbone of the team was shaped in those days. So some people got promoted, they are vice ministers, or they are directing different departments. So there are certain movements. Some people would go to the real economy sector, some would go to regional administrations, but we try to stick to the principles you mentioned. You need to live based on the demands in different companies and industries you care about have. You shouldn't be isolated from them. So you can't invent things for the businesses, what they need to implement this or that project. On the other hand, when we get ideas from the business, we try to look at them through the filter, well, of the bureaucracy, as you said, but it's not be seen as something negative, but rather you need to think on how to put things on paper and transform it into a statutory act which will allow companies to achieve those goals as certain plans. So some people cope and manage to do it. Some people can keep the pace. The majority of companies do, and some struggle too, and there should be no offense if an individual did good job in a normal work mode, but he struggles in the times of crisis, then we need to make a decision and shift him to areas where response from him would be more positive, because the crisis management is a special category, a certain group of people. So if we took the pace, we need to stick to it and keep it. And it also depends on the interaction between the enterprises and our ministry. If I see some positive feedback, then it supports and encourages us to show even more passion and commitment to focus on this area, to implement new projects and areas.
Mr. Mishustin's team, our Prime Minister's team, has really set a high pace, fantastic pace, and I'm sure we'll handle the vaccination process, but this machine will have to run at the same pace, and we can't stop this monster. We can't stop this machine, and the business community tries to keep up. What you said is extremely important. We used to think that the economy is driven by the business community. That's the stereotype under normal circumstances. This is true, and should be like that. But as you said correctly, the state machine sometimes works faster than the business community. So the business community needs to keep up with the same pace that is set by the government. And you, as the representative of the business community, needs to motivate your colleagues to be faster in their response so that they can bring new ideas. Thank you. We'll try to do that. I would like to thank Mr. Dmitriev for his contribution, and the Minister of Industry and Trade, Denis Manturov, and wish all of us health. We need to stay safe in these difficult times. We need to believe in ourselves. We need to love our homeland. And I'd like to wish all of us success. This success makes our homeland stronger. Thank you.